Hey everyone, this is Mike, and today we're going to be talking about Black Mage in Shadowbringers, the king of all DPS, albeit by a very small margin, as Samurai is a very close second. But when you think about the Black Mage, you think about big damage, and that is exactly what they are there for. That is their role in the party. Now, when you think about Black Mage, you also think about a turret, something that wants to stand still and deal their damage, because every time Black Mages have to move or move away from their ley lines, you can always hear them complain. Now, over the years, from going into Heavensward, going into Stormblood, and then now in Shadowbringers, Black Mage has become more and more mobile as we keep getting more mobility tools. We have triple cast, sharp cast to guarantee us a proc, which all of our procs are instant cast abilities as well. And then now in Shadowbringers we also have Xenoglossy, which is basically another thing that we can use our Polyglot Stacks on, that were introduced back in Stormblood. So we're definitely the most mobile that we have ever been when it comes down to Black Mage over the last few years. Now, when it comes down to playing Black Mage in actual endgame content, I don't really think that the difficulty from playing Black Mage comes from executing the rotation correctly. Yes, of course, you still need to do the rotation correctly, but it's not super complex like something like a Summoner that we looked at yesterday, and it is still, I would say, about on the same level as something like a Red Mage rotation, where things are fairly straightforward. There is a general flow that you are going to be following, from going into your fire phase to do damage, losing all of your mana, and then going into your ice phase to regenerate all of your mana again, and then just basically repeat that cycle. So it's fairly straightforward to get into. Now, where the real difficulty of playing Black Mage comes from is from mastering the movement around the fights. Of course, certain fights don't require you to move all that much, and then things will be fairly simple and you'll be like, okay, I have more movement tools than I actually need in these fights. But then on other fights, like for example Alexander Ultimate, Shiva is also a very good example. Those are two fights that require you to move a fair bit, and at those points playing Black Mage can be a little bit tricky. And then the difference between someone that has mastered the movement on Black Mage on those fights and someone that is just getting into it and doesn't know what they are doing is going to be gigantic when it comes down to the DPS output that they have. Because of course, if you don't have movement tools available and you need to move, you are going to be losing a lot of damage on Black Mage, which of course, losing damage when that is literally your sole purpose in the party is not going to be feeling that great. But of course, we still have a lot of movement tools available to us right now that after a few pulls, after you have killed the fight a few times, you'll be able to figure out what you are going to be doing and then increase your damage pull by pull as well, which is very satisfying to me, because once you have figured out all of the movement on a fight, Black Mage is incredibly satisfying to play when everything just feels like it falls into place. So, what are we working with on Black Mage? As I mentioned before, we have a fire phase during which we are going to be doing our damage. We have an ice phase during which we are going to be regenerating our MP. And the reason why I say that is because when you go into your fire phase, all of your fire spells are going to be dealing way more damage than they would otherwise. And they also have an increased mana cost, and on top of that you also lose all of your mana regeneration. So when you go into your fire phase, you're basically going to be dumping your mana extremely quickly. And we also have a phase finisher, I guess you could call it, in that of despair, which will put your mana all the way down to 0. Now once we are at that point, of course, we are going to be going into our ice phase, during which we are going to get an extremely rapid regeneration of our mana, taking about 1, 2 or 3 GCDs to get back to full mana. And then of course you can just repeat the cycle by going back into your fire phase. Now the reason why I say that it takes 1, 2 or 3 GCDs is because mana regeneration falls on server ticks, and if you remember what server ticks are from a previous video, these basically occur just about once every 3 seconds. So if you end up going into your ice buff right as the server tick happens, you might only need 1, maybe 2 GCDs inside this ice phase in order to get full mana back, because you need 2 ticks in order to get your full mana. But if you were to go into your ice phase just after a server tick, you might need an extra GCD to be full mana. So you need to kind of play around with them. There are some ways that you can like perfectly time your opener with the server ticks and that kind of stuff, but of course that is highly optimized stuff that I am not going to be talking about. Now the rotation I'm gonna be presenting to you guys as well is just the standard Black Mage rotation. I know that there is some really big brain stuff that you can do with transpose and not using Blizzard 4 in certain parts of the rotation and stuff, but that is highly optimized stuff. That is things that as a new player getting into Black Mage you definitely will not be doing, because if you do these at the wrong point, if you mistime something here or there, you're going to be losing much more DPS than you potentially could be gaining. So I'm definitely not going to be talking about those when it comes down to just introducing Black Mage to you guys, because that's really optimized stuff, and it's something that you definitely won't be doing unless you are trying to shoot for that rank 1 on FFLogs or anything like that. Now, when we go into our fire phase, let's talk about that one first. We have a few different skills available to us. First of all, we have Fire 3. This is our phase changing GCD, so to speak. We also have the same one going into Ice phase, which is called Blizzard 3. These are our phase changers because of one simple reason, or actually two. First of all, they cost no mana when you use them in the opposite element. So if you're in the Ice phase, using Fire 3 costs no mana. If you're in the Fire phase, using Blizzard 3 costs no mana to go back into your Ice phase, and that is why we can use Blizzard 3 when we are at 0 mana. Now, outside of just not costing any mana, they're also extremely fast to cast. Whenever you cast Fire 3 during your Fire phase, it has like a 3-second cast time or something like that. But when you cast it from the Ice phase, it only has like a 1.5-second cast time or something like that. I don't know the exact numbers. That thing that you heard, that was just my Gmail notification. So basically, you want to be using Blizzard 3 and Fire 3 to switch in between your two stances. Now, whilst we are in this Fire phase, we are basically going to be casting two Fire abilities. We have Fire 4. This is our big damage skill that we basically want to try to use as much as possible, and we have Fire 1 to refresh our Astral Fire buff, because the Astral Fire buff has a set duration on it, and Fire 4 does not refresh this buff, which is why we're going to be using Fire 1 in the middle of our fire rotation as to refresh that buff. And then by the time that we reach the end of our fire phase, make sure you have 800 or a little bit more mana left, and then you can use Despair to finish off the phase, and then use that Blizzard 3 to go into Ice. Now, one more thing about the fire phase is that when you use Fire 1, you have a chance of creating a Fire Starter proc. And this is fairly simple. It just makes it so that the next Fire 3 you're going to be using is going to cost no mana and is also an instant cast ability. So you can use this in the middle of your fire phase for example, weaving an extra GCD. So you can use this in the middle of your fire phase to just refresh your buff if, for example, you had to move a little bit, or you had to refresh your Thunder Dot, which I'll talk about in just a second. Or, for example, there was a little bit of downtime, you can use that as well. Or, for example, you can use it for movement, you can use it for weaving off global cooldowns, all of that good stuff. Now, when we go into our Ice phase, we of course use Blizzard 3 to get into there, and then we can also use Blizzard 4. This one deals a decent amount of damage, but will also generate Umbral Hearts for you. And Umbral Hearts basically make it so that the next 3 fire skills that you use have a reduced mana cost. You basically always, well, not always, but for the most part, you will want those Umbral Hearts when you go into your fire phase, so that you can do all of the fire 4s that you want to be doing. Because usually when you go into your fire phase, it is 3 fire 4s, 1 fire 1, 3 fire 4s, a Despair, and then you go into your Ice phase, and you need those Umbral Hearts in order to do all of these fire 4s out there, because otherwise you just won't have the mana to do it. Now, whilst we are in our Ice phase, this is also the best time for us to be refreshing our Thunder Dot. We have a damage over time ability that we want to try to keep up as much as possible, but of course this also costs mana to apply, and depending on server ticks, depending on like how much mana you have going into your fire phase, you might not be able to use Thunder 3 during your fire phase, because when you're in your fire phase, of course, you are not regenerating mana, and you want to make sure that you have enough in order to fit all those fire 4s in order to do that Despair at the end of your fire phase. And sometimes using a Thunder, like a reapplication, hard casting it, might make it so that you don't have enough mana to do that. Now, I say hard casting Thunder 3, and that is because Thunder 3, just like Fire 1, can also proc a buff. This one is called Thundercloud, and when you have the Thundercloud proc available, your Thunder 3 becomes instant cast and also costs no mana. So if you have Thundercloud available, you can always use this one during your fire phase without having to care about it costing that little bit of mana that the skill otherwise would cost. Now, of course, Thunder 3 with the Thundercloud proc is also really strong because it also does bonus damage, and again, it is an instant cast, so you can use it for movement, you can use it to weave some off-global cooldowns as well. Now, outside of this, we still have one other skill to talk about, and that is Xenoglossy. Now, whenever we are in our Astral Fire or Umbral Ice buff, we can activate Enochian. I forgot to talk about this one. Enochian is basically our damage buff that allows us to use Fire 4 and Blizzard 4. So you want to have this active at all times, and you can only use Enochian when Astral Fire or Umbral Ice is active. Now, as long as Enochian is active, which should technically be at all times of the fight, you're also slowly going to be generating Polyglot Stacks. Now, these stack up to 2 times, you get 1 every 30 seconds, and you can spend them on either a Foul, which is an AoE ability, or on a Xenoglossy, which is a single target ability. Now, this Xenoglossy is again an instant cast ability, allowing for, you guessed it, movement of global cooldowns, all of that kind of good stuff that Black Mage was kind of lacking in the previous iterations of the job. So all of these things combined make it so that Black Mage is fairly mobile right now. So that is basically the general rotation that you are going to be following. You cast your Fire 3 to go into your Fire phase, 3 Fire 4s, a Fire 1, 3 Fire 4s, a Despair, Blizzard 3 to go into your Ice phase, a Blizzard 4 to get you those Umbral Hearts, then reapply your Thunder Dot if you need to, maybe use a Xenoglossy to make sure that you get all of your mana back, and then you just go back into Fire phase using that Fire 3. So that's kind of like the general rotation flow that you're going to be following. Of course, depending on where your Thunder reapplication falls, it might be during your Fire phase. Your Ice phase might look a little bit different as well. There are some different iterations here or there that you will have to adjust to on the fly, depending on if you get those Thundercloud, depending on if you get that Fire Starter proc. Now, of course, we still have a bunch of off-global cooldowns that we have to talk about as well, which are mainly going to be there for us to deal more damage, but also to grant us some movement. First of all, we have ley lines. This is the little circle that you often see Black Mages sit in and cry about when they have to leave it, because this gives them a very big DPS boost. Whenever you're sitting inside these ley lines, you get a very strong attack speed buff, and of course, the faster you are attacking, the more damage you are going to be doing, so you definitely want to stay in this one as much as possible. Now, when you do have to leave your ley lines for example, mechanics that are happening, then you still have between the lines, which will teleport you back to your ley lines, thus kind of saving you some movement of having to move back into them. We also have Sharpcast. This will guarantee the next proc that we get. So I talked about the Fire Starter procs being a chance from Fire 1. I talked about the Thundercloud procs being a chance for when your dot is applied to the boss. Basically, if you use Sharpcast and you then use a Fire 1, you are guaranteed the Fire Starter. If you use Sharpcast and then Thunder 3, you are guaranteed to get that Thundercloud proc. So this is another way for you to guarantee some movement abilities for when you need them. Staying with movement, we also have Triple Cast. This will make it so that the next 3 casted GCDs that we do will be instant casts, and this is technically also a DPS gain because our Fire Force and our Despair have a longer cast time than the GCD recast timer, so just using this for damage is totally viable as well. But of course, if you're not familiar with the fight, you can just save Triple Cast for a movement heavy part of the fight, for example. Then we also have Monophones. This will grant you a little bit of mana back. Usually what you do is you end your Fire phase with that Despair, thus ending on 0 mana. And then you can use an instant cast GCD, be it that Fire 3 with the Fire Starter proc, be it a Xenoglossy, be it maybe a Swift casted Despair or something like that. You can use Monophones, get some mana back, do an extra Fire 4, do an extra Despair before you go into that Ice phase. And then last but not least, we also have Ethereal Manipulation. This is our teleport to a party member. This is another way for us to maneuver around the fight. Usually what you see some people do in high-end raid groups is they have the ranged physical DPS, go to specific points on the map, and then basically have the Black Mage teleport to them. Basically some really nice team synergy that you can have going on over here. This is also on a fairly low cooldown, so if you really need it, you can basically just teleport around the map using Ethereal Manipulation instead of walking around the map yourself, which is also pretty fun to use. So that is pretty much a quick rundown of Black Mage. Fairly straightforward job to get into. When it comes down to really mastering the job, it's all about mastering the movement of a specific fight, being able to move around all of the mechanics, and as you get more comfortable on a fight, you'll also see that your DPS just keeps going higher and higher until you finally hit that feeling of being a real Black Mage that is just dishing out all of the damage. Very satisfying job indeed to play, very simple to get into as well because the normal rotation is fairly simple. It's really all about mastering the movement in my opinion. But that's gonna be it for me. I want to thank you for watching. I want to thank my Patreons for supporting me, and I'll see you in the next one.